Good morning. I hadn't heard the bell ring yet, but according to my Mickey, it's time to start. There's the bell. Okay. Before we begin our class, though, we just need to keep in mind all of those people that are on our sick list. Always keep Brother Clonch and Janice and Jesse and Jeremy in your prayers, and the Fullers, the Stablers, Holly, pardon? Right. Lisa will be traveling tomorrow, going to Utah this time to get her treatment. And this is the third major trip she's had to make in the last couple of months since her regular doctor up in Birmingham has had to leave, and travel is expensive. So we made the announcement last week, but if anybody can, if you would either give me or Jeremy Clonch anything that you want to give to the Wrights to help them with that cost. Jeremy was going to bring some cash today, so if you've got check, since she's leaving in the morning, if you've got check, we'll just switch it to cash so they can have the money today. So, but if you do that, I know his family would greatly appreciate it. Anyone else on the sick and injured list? Yes. Wow, great. So that they found a donor for the blood marrow, or the marrow transplant. Only 4. Well, the younger they are, sometimes the better it is. That's all the sick that we know of, but tomorrow the Clonches will be traveling to go to a funeral. Sister Janice Charles Rice, which is the last of her uncles, passed away, and the funeral will be tomorrow. So let's keep them in our prayers as they travel and go to the funeral. Anything else before we have a prayer and begin class? Brother Jeremy, would you lead us in a prayer then, please?
Father, we thank you for another day, for an opportunity to come together. Thank you, Lord. We share our faith and our belief in you. Father, we ask you to be with us. We have so many of our numbers who are sick in various ways. Father, I think that we're not sure about how to pray. But Father, we know that you are the God that created the universe. You know how bad the situation means your name. And we pray for your help and healing. Father, we ask you to be with us, the congregation of your people. Help us to grow closer to you every day, to look for opportunities to better ourselves, and to spread the gospel to those who need to hear. Father, be with all of us. Help us to remember that Christ and his sacrifice are our reason for being and our hope for heaven when this life is over. Father, if you've done that, we pray. Amen.
And I did forget one. The Harvales are out of town this week, and with her getting close to delivery time, let's keep them in our prayers while they're traveling. Genesis chapter 23. Genesis chapter 23. And I suppose, for lack of a better term, I'm a Bibleaholic. I can be reading through the scripture. We're on our journey through the Old Testament right now, and you get to some chapters that look relatively simple, that you can just read through them and go on. But then, if you stop and park on them and look at them a little bit, wow, there's a bunch of information there, and that's what I found to be with this chapter 23 of Genesis. How much can you say about a woman dying and her husband finding a burying place for her? In essence, that's what the whole chapter is about. But let's just start with verse 1 and take a look and just see how much information we can glean out of this chapter. Sarah was 107 and 20 years old. In today's language, she'd be 127 when she passed away. You know that Sarah is, how many other women can you think of in the Bible? And you don't have to give me a number. This is just a rhetorical question, but how many women in the Bible do you know of where they talk about their age, their death? About the only other one, right? But so it's important here that, and then when you get over into Galatians, you find out that, well, let's just go there and look. Galatians 4. I know my Bible has it in it. Galatians 4, verses 22 and 23. For it is written that Abraham had two sons, the one by a bondmaid, the other by a free woman. But he who was of the bondwoman was born after the flesh, but he of the free woman was by promise. So that goes in then and tells us what we've already known, that Hagar was the bondwoman, had a son, Ishmael, and then the free woman, Sarah, his wife, Isaac, was by promise. Then if you go to Hebrew 11:11, Hebrew 11:11 says, through faith also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed and was delivered of a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. It was God that had promised. So here it just verifies that this was a miracle that took place. So the other part of it is that she's 127 when she dies, meaning how old is Isaac at this time? How old was she when Isaac was born? 90 or 90, 91, somewhere right in that range. But so Isaac was 37 when she passed away. If you want to try to go back to a previous chapter, chapter 21 and verse 5, it talks about how old Abraham was, and then we know that Sarah was about 10 years younger, so that would put her at about 90 or so. Just in that very first verse, we know that she was a free woman, that she had a son by promise, out of due season, which means it was a miracle that took place. God intervened. Her son was 37 years old when she died. Wow, that's a lot of information for one little verse, isn't it? And then in verse 2, it says, Sarah died in Kirjath Arba. The same as Hebron in the land of Canaan, and Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Again, if you go to Judges on this one, Judges 1 and verse 10, it again goes in that the place that is known as Hebron used to be called Kirjath Arba, and that's where she was when she passed away. Now, I also need you to look at what it says about Abraham came to mourn her. What does that phrase mean, that he came to mourn her? Wasn't she his wife? Where did he come from? What? If you go back to the previous chapter, chapter 21, chapter 22, and look at verse 19, Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. So Abraham apparently was at Beersheba, and his wife was at Kirjath Arba. Why would that be? He went to go do something. Remember how large his herds happened to be? If you think about it just in a logical sense, back in the old days, Western days, when people had ranches out in Texas, they would have to go camp out overnight to round up the cows and all and take care of them and then go feed. So it would not be unusual here for him to be with the herd, tending the herd, because these two locations are only about 24 miles apart. You travel about 24 miles to work every day, don't you? Thereabouts. You're 25? So, but with our modern transportation, you can go home every night. Here, 25 miles was a day's journey on foot, so they couldn't go home. So when they went to tend cattle, they had to stay for a while, or their livestock. So, yes, sir. Right, right. So that gives us a whole bunch of information here. And he came to mourn and weep for Sarah. Then Abraham stood up from before his dead and spake unto the sons of Heth, saying, now let's look at verse 4. Abraham is speaking to the sons of Heth. We won't get into all that lineage, we'll just get confused. But he's speaking to the sons of Heth, saying, I am a stranger and a sojourner with you. Now, this land that he is in, had he not been promised that land to he and his kinfolks, his offspring? So why is it saying that he is a stranger and a sojourner at this particular spot? Hadn't received the promise? Anything else? Correct? Everybody out. That's correct. That is correct. And also, we don't think of things today in those terms, but if we look back on the way culture goes, in essence, even though I have been here over 30 years, I am a sojourner in Millbrook, Alabama, because I was not born here. I was born in North Alabama, in Huntsville. So in essence, all this means when he says he's a stranger and a sojourner is that he was not born here. He's basically a transplant. He come from someplace else. And also, some of this land belongs to somebody else. As you said, he just can't walk in and just say, everybody out, this now belongs to me. So then he says, give me a possession of a burying place with you. What does he mean by give me a burying place? We'll find out as we read on later, but let's just park on that verse right now. Yes and no, not exactly, because this don't belong to him yet. So he had looked the land over and knew that that's where he wanted. That would be the same as me today. I don't have a plot yet. I know where I would think I want to be, but what if they don't have room for me? Then I'm going to have to go someplace else. So here he has got an area picked out, but it's not his yet. But what does he mean by the term give? Purchase. He wants to buy that land. We'll find that out as we go on in verses later. But And this, I guess, is a good time to sit and talk about it, because later on we'll find out that they offer to give it to him, but he is insistent on buying it. Why is he insistent on buying it versus just using somebody else's spot? Brother Golden? Okay. We need to go into culture just a little bit. And I'm not exactly sure how I want to go about this, but let's just start with us today, because we today don't have the same feelings as my grandparents, for instance, about certain things. Why are we today so insistent that our military that die overseas get back to the United States? Pardon? Be buried on their own land. Why? If you think about it as a Christian, why? Where does it matter where this body goes or where it is when I pass away? It don't matter. It's to those that you leave behind, and this is where we're getting to about what you said, their own place. We want our Americans to be on American soil. When I was much younger, and I referenced my grandparents, they had their family plots, and everybody that died went to the family plot. It's not that way so much anymore. As people travel around and move, they find new places to be buried. They don't go back to the family plots, brother. Plot. Right. Who can tell me what the term ignominious means? Ignominious. In essence, it means deserving of disgrace or public shame. And again, when we go into culture, people during Abraham's time, if people weren't buried on their own plot, their own spot, then it was a disgrace. They had to own the spot that their people were buried on for it not to be a shame or a disgrace. So that ties all of that up as to why Abraham is so insistent on buying and not just, there could have been a deed transfer. They were willing to give him the property. It would have still been his, but yet he would have had no investment in it. And what do we find out in another passage about a guy wanting to take something and build an altar and offer, and he wanted to pay for the spot, and the guy wanted to give it to him, and he said, "What does my offer mean if I have no investment?" I'm paraphrasing this, but basically, if he has no investment in it, it's not his offering. Does that make sense? So here, Abraham is talking to the people that have influence on the people that own the property and telling them that he wants to buy it so that he can bury the dead. And he said, Brother Clunch? Brother Clunch says, if anybody needs to be buried in Birmingham, he has one burial plot. Is that a double or a single? You know what I mean by double, don't you? Double stack. Well, there's places that will not, places that will. There are places where you can go be buried without caskets and vaults, and they call them green or natural. There's all kinds of things going on. But anyway, in verse 5 through verse 9, we need to read together for it to make sense. It says, the children of Heth answered Abraham, saying unto him, Hear us, my Lord, thou art a mighty prince among us, and in the choice of our sepulchres bury thy dead. None of us shall withhold from thee his sepulchre, but that thou mayest bury the dead. And Abraham stood up and bowed himself to the people of the land, even to the children of Heth. And he communed with them, saying, If it be your mind that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me and entreat me to Ephron the son of Zohar, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he hath, which is in the end of his field, for as much money as it is worth, he shall give it me for a possession of a burying place amongst you. Again, this is when he's talking about giving, he's actually saying, sell it to me, that I'm going to give you what it's worth. I'm not going to bargain, just going to give you what it's worth. But it had to be his. He had to have the investment for it to be his, for it to mean anything. Ephron dwelt among the children of Heth, and Ephron the Hittite answered. Let me do that again, messed up. And Ephron dwelt among the children of Heth, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the audience of the children of Heth, even of all that went in at the gate of his city, saying. So again, we go back to custom. What was the customary place to do business? At the gate of the city with people around, people as witnesses. When we get over to the book of Ruth, where was Ruth bargained for? At the gate of the city, so, with the elders around as witness. Nay, my Lord, hear me. The field I give I thee, and the cave that is therein I give it thee. In the presence of the sons of my people give I it thee. Bury thy dead. He wasn't trying to be disrespectful or mean any harm in any way. He was just trying to help Abraham out. Abraham is a well-known person. You don't need to give me anything for it. I'm going to give you this. But then look in verse 12. Abraham bowed down before the people of the land. And he spake unto Ephron in the audience of the people of the land, saying, But if thou wilt give it, I pray thee, hear me, I will give thee money for the field. Take it of me, and I will bury my dead there. My dad was one of the most good-hearted people that I think I've ever known. And we have gone out with people to eat before, and my dad was so insistent on paying the bill, and then when you get somebody as hard-headed as my dad, like one of my uncles, it was entertaining to sit there and watch them bicker back and forth, who's going to pay this bill? And it was just because Andrea knows what I'm talking about. I give up on even trying. After I got in the Air Force, we got married, and I could afford it. We'd go home and we'd eat with him, and I'd start to reach, and he would be there. I stopped even fighting with him over it. So, but here Abraham is just insistent that where he's going to bury Sarah is going to be his. He's going to own it. He's going to have an investment in it. Verse 14 then says, Ephron answered Abraham, saying unto him, My Lord, hearken unto me. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that betwixt me and thee? Bury therefore thy dead. So again, he's trying to say, well, let me just give it to you. It's worth this much, but you've got a lot, I've got a lot. What is this? Brother Golan? Mm.
They were close to well off. That was what we used to say, that's
Chicken feed, that's just.
Abraham.
Now, when I used to fish a lot, fish tournaments, I had one guy that I really liked to fish with. And when we would go fish or even go out practicing, we would switch up. One day I'd take my boat, one day he'd take his boat. And if somebody went to get food, they got food and come back, would take no money for it. Because if you looked at it over a year's period of time, if you're switching off on equipment and doing things like that, it's pretty much going to balance out. But then I have fished with people in that club that at the end of the day, everything would be written down and divided out to the penny. I didn't like dealing with those folks. When I was in the Air Force and had to go on TDY's temporary duty, it seemed to me like that when I went out with a bunch of enlisted folks, that the same rules took place. We all went out to eat. Ticket came. We looked at it. We each threw some money in the pot to cover the food, and that was it. But every time I went out with an officer to eat, out came the calculator. But here, they're just saying, it's not enough money to talk about. It's chicken feed, as Brother Golden said. Just take it and go. But then Abraham hearkened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed to Ephron the silver, which he had named in the audience of the sons of Heth, 400 shekels of silver, current money with the merchant. Abraham just wasn't going to have any of it. If I'm going to own the field, I'm going to buy the field. And the field of Ephron, which was in Machpelah, which was before Mamre, the field and the cave which was therein, and all the trees that were in the field that were in all the borders round about, were made sure unto Abraham for a possession in the presence of the children of Heth before all that were in at the gate of his city. So in front of everybody in the city, there at the gate where business was transacted, everybody now knew that that field belonged to Abraham by purchase, not by gift. Means what? Permanent, yeah. Brother Go, sorry, Brother Clunch. Right. Well, if you didn't hear that, Brother Clunch said back at Sodom, Abraham tried to bargain with a number of souls, a number of people to save Sodom, and here there was no bargaining. Since you brought that up, I sort of see a major difference. One is souls and one is material. And he just had, Abraham had plenty, so didn't need to bargain for it. Anything else so far? And after this, Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, the same as Hebron in the land of Canaan. And the field and the cave that is therein were made sure unto Abraham for a possession of a burying place by the sons of Heth. Let's jump over to Genesis chapter 49 for just a minute. Genesis chapter 49. And look at 29 and 30. And remember, when we get to Genesis 49, Abraham is in the land of Egypt on his deathbed. And he says, he charged them and said unto them, I am to be gathered unto my people, bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittite for a possession of a burying place. So we jump ahead to Abraham's death, and by charging them, what is he doing with his sons at this point? If you give somebody charge, I charge you to do this, that, or the other, what are you telling them to do? Basically, I'm ordering you to, or giving you the responsibility that this is what's going to take place. And he wanted to be buried in the same cave there with Sarah. Brother Clint? That could be. Brother Clients just said that all this money could be that somebody need to take care of the place. I find it very interesting that this is just a little off topic, but I find it very interesting that in the United States, we buy spots to be buried, but we don't make arrangements for caretakers. We assume that comes with it, and in most cemeteries and graveyards, it does. But if you just drive around out in the country sometime and look at some of the older cemeteries, they're overgrown, they're let go, nobody's taking care of them. The flip side of that is Andrew and I have been in foreign countries, and people don't buy spots. They rent them. And if they don't pay the rent, they're evicted. Somebody else gets it. And also, they're taken care of to the point where, and this is generally family members doing it. Remember Manila, Philippines? All the fancy graveyards there, and people would daily light candles, bring food on a daily basis to take care of the deceased. So just an interesting bit of cultural difference there. Any other questions then on chapter 23 or comments? Okay. 24 is a long chapter. We'll get to where we get to, and then Brother Clunch will finish this one, and then whatever we can get to in 25 Wednesday night. Verse 24, Abraham was old and well stricken in age, and the Lord had blessed him in all things. Well, if Sarah was 127 when she died, how old was Abraham? 137. Brother Golden? Yeah, he lived quite a bit longer. Right. We're going to get into all of their ages here shortly. Abraham said unto his eldest servant of his house that ruled over all that he had, but I pray thee, put thy hand. Let me start over again. And Abraham said unto his eldest servant of his house that ruled over all that he had, put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh. That was one of their ways or one of their customs of making a promise. Now, I grew up in the day where especially as kids, thankfully we've grown out of it, but if you made a bargain with somebody, you spit in your hand and shook hands with them. We don't do that anymore. I even have a blood brother or two roaming around where we cut ourselves, and we don't do that anymore. We know the the dangers of blood transfers and such. But here it was just their way. And how many times have you heard somebody or seen somebody make a pinky square? But here, that's just one of their customs. Another custom of theirs was, and again, we go to the book of Ruth to find this out, when the bargain was struck, when the bargain was done, what happened? Took a shoe off. The shoe was given in exchange for the promise. So all through culture, you find different things that people, today, you need your name on a contract. And it's as worthless as anything else. If a person is not good for their word, a person is not good for their signature. It's just a legal way of trying to do something if things don't go the way it's supposed to. Can't recall his name right offhand. I saw him at the Grand Ole Opry when I was a teenager, but they said they had rather have a handshake from him than a signed contract because he was good for his word. But and even when I was growing up, my grandfather's word was bond, so people would. Well, as a matter of fact, it even happened with me. It wasn't my word, it was my dad's word, but when Andrew and I were in the Philippines getting ready to come back to the United States, we had been there for 2 years, and we needed to borrow a little money to get a start back in the States. And I wrote my dad, told him, we didn't have cell phones back in those days either. Wrote him a letter and told him what I needed, and he went talked to the president of the bank. Proper response time for snail mail. We got a big number 10 envelope in the mail that was about that thick. Opened it up, and it had a contract in it and a letter that said, money's already in the bank, fill this out and send it back. Could you do that today? Maybe some of you could with some people, but not likely. Anyway, he got him to make the promise, and he said, swear by the Lord thy God of heaven and the God of the earth, that thou shalt not take a wife unto my son of the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell. Think for just a minute the responsibility that this servant, now, true, this is the eldest servant that he has, so he's been with him a long time. But look at the responsibility that was put on somebody that was not his own flesh and blood. You make sure that my son does not marry somebody of this region. If we roll forward a little bit, think of Joseph in Egypt. Joseph wasn't even an Egyptian, but yet what responsibility did he wind up with? To start with, he was over the house. Then things went awry and we move on. But here he's given a whole lot of responsibility. Now, why, I think it very important at this point to understand why he doesn't want somebody of that region to be the wife. Why is it that he did not want his son marrying a Canaanite? Bingo, idolatry. You see, all through Scripture, they never talked about the people from various regions because they were from the region. It was because of idolatry. David was warned, and what happened to David? Solomon was warned, but what happened to Solomon? Married all these women and different things happened. And it was because of the influence that they would have, not because of their nationality or who they were, but because of their religious background. Yes, sir. Solomon. Mm-hmm. Took his heart away from God. Verse 4 says, but thou shalt go into my country and to my kindred and take a wife unto my son Isaac. Remember now that this was still all legal back in. We hadn't got to the point where next of kin wasn't legal. And the servant said unto him, peradventure the woman will not be willing to follow me unto this land. Must I needs bring thy son again unto the land from whence thou came? Abraham said unto him, beware thou that thou bring not my son again there. The Lord God of heaven, which took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, and which spake unto me, and that sware unto me, saying, unto thy seed will I give this land, he shall send his angel before thee, and thou shalt take a wife unto my son from thence. And if the woman will not be willing to follow thee, then thou shalt be clear from this my oath, only bring not my son thither again. So he is very clear on this issue. You don't take my son out of this land back to that land, but you bring him a wife from that land to this land. You swear that to me by this oath, but if she won't come, you're free from the oath. So a lot of responsibility, but yet there was an out if things didn't work out the way it was supposed to. Questions, comments? I personally just think that if he went back, he probably would stay and not come back, or he had that fear that he would do that and not come back. Just speculation. And he's got to stay in the promised land, not dwell in another spot. Andrew and I have been in many promised lands, or I have anyway. When I was in Denver, Colorado for 3 years, when I retired from the Air Force, I'm going back to Denver. When I was in Memphis, Tennessee. When I retired from the Air Force, we're going back to Memphis, Tennessee. I retired from the Air Force almost 30 years ago. Still in Millbrook, Alabama. This is now my promised land. So he's to go back to find a wife, Miss Kindred. And the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham his master and sware to him concerning that matter. And the servant took 10 camels of the camels of his master and departed, for all the goods in his master were in his hand. And he arose and went into Mesopotamia, into the city of Nahor. Who is Nahor? Abraham's brother. Thank you. I'm sorry? No, not Lot's father. Oh, yeah, Lot's father. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. He made his camels to kneel down without the city by a well of water at the time of the evening, even the time that women go out to draw water. I think this is a good spot to point out too, that when he went to get his wife there and the women were coming out to draw water, a lot of times people have a misunderstanding of women in the Old Testament. Because of the way things are worded, they think them dainty creatures that stayed in the house and did the things just in the house. But we find out that the women had chores outside. They tended the sheep. They drew the water for them. They had a lot of outside activity and a lot of outside responsibility. And that's a good place to stop. Brother Clunch can pick up at verse 12 Wednesday night, Lord willing.